Her red eyes glowed with fear she tried to hide. "My face is frightening," she whispered. I stepped closer. "Elantha, you're breathtaking." Before we begin, make sure to subscribe for more long-form HFY sci-fi romance stories just like this one. Torchlight flickered across the ancient courtyard, casting long shadows against towering stone archways as Miles Arlen stumbled through the palace grounds he was never meant to enter. He'd been separated from his supply team hours ago. One wrong turn on a foreign world, one miscalculated path. And now he stood before the most feared sovereign in this quadrant of space. Empress Elantha Chorus, tall and pale as moonlit marble, regarded him with eyes like burning embers. Her crown of obsidian spires framed her face like a living constellation of dark power. Her armor, intricately carved and form-fitting, gave the impression she'd stepped out of a myth designed to frighten children into obedience. And yet, beneath her stern facade, there was something else. A flicker of vulnerability hidden behind centuries of practiced intimidation. Miles swallowed, unsure if he should bow, run, or apologize for existing. The guards trembled. The air buzzed with expectation. The Empress waited. And Miles, tired, disoriented, and guided only by his stubbornly kind instincts, said the one thing no one had ever dared tell her. "You look sad." Her glowing eyes widened, startled, and for the first time in centuries, the Empress forgot how to be terrifying. Miles had assumed he'd spend the day unloading medical supplies from the humanitarian shuttle, not accidentally wandering into the throne courts of a cosmic vampire monarch. But after the malfunctioning drone cart veered off course and Miles chased it down a confusing network of hallways, the palace's labyrinthine architecture swallowed him whole. He only realized how far he'd strayed when heavily armored guards surrounded him, spears glowing with crackling plasma. "Human intruder," one barked. "Confiscate his belongings," shouted another. "Do not harm him," a third whispered urgently. "Her radiance is approaching." Miles blinked. "Her who?" The torches dimmed. The air chilled. The guards snapped into sharp lines. And then she appeared. Empress Elantha Chorus walked toward him with the slow, graceful precision of a being used to commanding galaxies with a glance. Her long silver hair drifted behind her as though gravity bent in reverence. Her armor, dark, elegant, and beautifully engraved, drew the eye to her commanding form. Her crimson eyes glowed with an intensity that should have inspired terror. Miles, who had seen plenty of intimidating leaders, was unprepared for this level of dramatic presence. The guards dropped to their knees in perfect synchronization. Miles did not. He stood frozen in a combination of shock, awe, and the confused exhaustion of someone who hadn't eaten since breakfast. Elantha stared down at him like he was an anomaly she hadn't calculated. "You trespassed into my sanctum," she said, voice low and melodic. "Most beings tremble in my presence." Miles looked around awkwardly. Should I start trembling now, or? A ripple of horror spread through the guards. Elantha's lips parted in faint astonishment. He continued before his brain caught up with his mouth. "You seem upset." A beat of silence fell so heavy it felt like thunder waiting to strike. Elantha's eyes flickered, not in anger, but confusion. Genuine confusion. "Upset," she echoed. Miles nodded, shoulders sinking with sympathy he absolutely should not have felt. "Yeah. You've got that someone said something cruel before you got out of bed look." The guards collectively inhaled like he'd thrown himself into a star. Elantha, however, did something no one expected. Her expression faltered. For a fraction of a second, the mask of the Galactic Terror Queen cracked, revealing an emotion so raw, Miles almost stepped closer without thinking. Then she recovered, lifting her chin in a regal attempt at control. "I am not upset," She cleared her throat, projecting her voice with practiced authority. Your perception is flawed, human. Oh, my mistake, he said gently. Still looks like you could use a sit-down and maybe some water. More horrified gasps from the guards. Elantha blinked several times, as though trying to reboot. Water, she repeated, tasting the word like it was foreign. Miles realized he might have misstepped. Or, whatever it is your species drinks. Celestial night juice? Plasma nectar? I'm not judging. She stared at him with a bewilderment normally reserved for cryptic prophecy. You are not afraid of me? She asked. Miles shrugged. Should I be? The guards nodded vigorously behind her. Elantha folded her arms defensively. I am a sovereign who commands fear from entire star systems. Miles tilted his head. But why? That question hit her harder than any plasma blast. Because, she paused, because that is how emperors rule. Sounds exhausting, Miles said sympathetically. A tiny sound escaped her, something between a scoff and a flustered exhale. She quickly regained her emperor posture, but her glowing eyes betrayed that she was more rattled by a lost human traveler than by any political uprising. You will remain here, she declared, pointing to him with regal authority. My scholars must study why you are immune to terror. Miles rubbed the back of his neck. I think I'm just really tired. She frowned. Then you will be observed until your clarity returns. The guard scrambled around him like he was a priceless artifact requiring a protective barrier. Miles blinked. Observed? Like a guest? Elantha hesitated. An unthinkable pause from a woman who commanded armies. Yes, she said softly. A guest. The word tasted unfamiliar on her tongue. Miles smiled. Elantha quickly looked away to hide the faint glow of color that pulsed beneath her pale cheeks. A subtle sign of fluster her people hoped never to witness. For the first time in her reign, someone hadn't bowed, and she wasn't sure she minded. Miles Arlen did not expect to wake up in silk sheets, especially not silk sheets woven with shimmering filaments that pulsed faintly. Blood thread, one servant had proudly explained, perfectly calibrated to your warm blood comforting requirements. He still wasn't sure if that was flattering or extremely concerning. But by the time he sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes, two things were already clear. This palace operated on 10,000 years of tradition and dramatics. That tradition had absolutely no idea what to do with him. A knock thundered against his door like someone trying to break in. Human Miles Arlen, a deep voice boomed. Her Radiance summons you for the morning observational ritual. Miles winced. Do you have to yell? No, the guard answered honestly, still yelling. But it is customary in the presence of death aristocracy. I'm not death aristocracy, Miles mumbled, throwing on his jacket. When he opened the door, the guard, a massive, stone-faced warrior named Captain Dravik, stood perfectly rigid, but his armor was trembling slightly. Whether that was nerves or simply its natural resting state was unclear. She awaits, Dravik said, then lowered his voice. Please walk slowly. The last time someone hurried in her presence, they fainted. That's good to know. As Dravik escorted him through the palace, servants peeked around corners, whispering loudly as if he couldn't hear. That's him. The fearless human? Is he enchanted? No, I heard he's just weird. Miles pretended he didn't hear that last one. He was led into a grand chamber lit by glowing red lanterns. Empress Elantha Chorus stood in the center, wearing armor that looked slightly less terrifying than before. But only slightly. Her crown was still sharp enough to slice through steel. She held a small datapad, staring at it intensely. Miles Arlen, she said, trying to sound regal. I am attempting a casual greeting appropriate for human comfort. She cleared her throat, glanced at the pad again, and read stiffly. Hello? How is weather of your feelings? Miles blinked. Weather of my feelings? Her glowing eyes narrowed with concentration. Is this not the correct phrase? Your languages are perplexing and emotional. It's, close. Kinda poetic, actually. She brightened ever so slightly. Then it pleases you? Yes, Miles lied kindly. The datapad disappeared behind her cape so fast, one might think she teleported it. Good, she said, regaining composure. We shall begin the observational ritual. What is that exactly? Before she could answer, a small swarm of palace scholars shuffled in, short, robed creatures with glowing monocles and an alarming enthusiasm for note-taking. Human subject Miles Arlen, one squeaked. Please perform a standard morning routine for scientific documentation. Miles froze. Like brushing my teeth? Yes, they all hissed in excitement. Elantha looked mortified. You need not obey them. Their curiosity overwhelms their manners. Miles chuckled. It's fine, honestly. This is the least weird thing that's happened since I got here. She stared at him with fascination, because he meant it. Later, Elantha insisted he join her in the private dining hall. She sat rigidly, trying to mimic human posture based on a diagram she clearly misunderstood. Miles, she said solemnly, I have prepared sustenance for you myself. He glanced down at the plate. It was steaming. It was purple. It was also slightly twitching. Oh, Miles said gently. It's lively. Elantha clasped her hands nervously. I studied human culinary recordings, specifically breakfast scramble. Mine may be unique. It squeaked. Miles hesitated for half a second. Then he smiled warmly, because she really had tried, and her nervousness was painfully cute. He took a bite. The entire table leaned in. It's... Miles paused, searching for the kindest truth. Ambitious. Really ambitious. Elantha nearly sagged in relief. Excellent. I shall refine the recipe. No, yes, maybe add less wriggling. She blinked. This is a necessary protein enhancement to avoid human fragility. Your species collapses easily. That's not inaccurate. Dravik coughed in the corner. He fainted earlier. He whispered to another guard. I did not, Miles protested. They ignored him. Elantha, however, looked concerned. Does your fragility hurt? Miles smiled at her. Only when I do something stupid. Then you must avoid stupidity, she declared seriously, then paused. Although you arrived here through stupidity. Miles winced. Yeah, that tracks. But she didn't say it cruelly. If anything, she sounded fond. After breakfast, and after Miles discreetly apologized to the food organism he'd eaten, Elantha offered, awkwardly, to show him the palace grounds. This is where I hold judgment, she said, leading him past towering pillars. This is the Hall of Shadows. It frightens diplomats. This is the Whisper Balcony. People think I brood here. I actually meditate. Miles nodded thoughtfully. You're not nearly as scary as everyone makes you sound. She froze, then turned slowly, eyes glowing with a complex mix of emotions. You truly believe that? I do. Her breath caught, silent, subtle, but visible in the way her shoulders relaxed. Your perception, she whispered, is unlike any being I have known. And yours is beautiful, he said before thinking. Her eyes widened. The red glow brightened. She turned quickly away, pretending to examine the architecture so he wouldn't see her flustered expression. "We should continue the tour," she murmured. Miles smiled softly. The Empress of Dread was blushing. Miles Arlen quickly learned that palace life had two speeds: ceremonial overkill, people panicking. Because the Empress looked at something for too long. And somewhere between those extremes, he existed, confusing everyone simply by being friendly. The morning after the palace tour, he found himself seated in the Empress's private study, a cavernous chamber lit by floating crimson lanterns and stacked with towering shelves of ancient tomes. Elantha Chorus sat behind a sleek, obsidian desk. Posture perfect, expression neutral. But her glowing eyes betrayed a restless curiosity. A small stack of datapads sat beside her, labeled Human Behaviors, Observed Patterns, Human Emotional Range, Disturbingly Wide, Miles Arlen Notes, Highly Inconclusive. Miles pretended not to notice that last one. Elantha folded her hands. "Miles, today's goal is to understand your unusual resistance to terror." Miles shrugged. "Maybe I'm just tired again." She blinked slowly, as if recalibrating. "Fatigue cannot explain this. Even exhausted humans exhibit fear responses." "Fair, but I have a weird job. I meet a lot of stressed-out leaders. You're actually one of the calmer ones." Elantha, the terror of 7 star systems, stared at him like he'd handed her a newborn son. Calm?" Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "You're composed, focused. You care about people even if you hide it. That's calm to me." The glow in her eyes warmed subtly. She quickly looked away, pretending to study a datapad. "Thank you," she murmured. Before the moment could settle, the doors burst open and a swarm of robed scholars stormed in, their glowing monocles flickering with frantic energy. "Human subject," squeaked Archivist Velerin. "We require additional emotional mapping. Please exhibit a random human emotion." "Yes, surprise us." Miles blinked. Like what? Joy? Anger? Regret because I said yes to this?" "All of them," they chanted in unison. Elantha's claws tapped the desk as she glared. "Enough! You are overwhelming him." "We are studying him," Velerin protested. "He is fascinating. He smiles directly at your radiance, even though her visage should induce existential panic." Miles raised a hand. "Right here. Can hear you." The scholars spun toward him with fascination. "Human subject. Why do you not flee at the sight of fangs? Or glowing eyes? Or death armor forged from the bones of ancient tyrants?" Miles frowned. "Wait, is that true?" Elantha stiffened. "No." "Yes." "Up," scholars said. Elantha growled. "Quiet." Miles laughed. "Look, she's intimidating, but she's not scary to me." The scholars gasped like he'd revealed a forbidden prophecy. Elantha froze, staring at the floor as if trying to understand the gravitational pull of his words. No one had ever described her as not scary, and meant it as a compliment. Later that afternoon, she approached him in the courtyard where he'd found a quiet spot beside an ancient fountain. The air shimmered with soft red light, fireflies drifting lazily around marble statues. "Miles," she said, clasping her hands behind her back. "May I join you?" He scooted over on the stone bench. "Of course." She sat, with flawless posture, knees together, hands gently folded, like a sculpture trying very hard to be casual. "I have been studying human social exchanges," she announced matter-of-factly. Miles braced. "Oh boy." She lifted a small notebook decorated with black roses. "I have compiled opening lines humans use to initiate comfortable conversation. I shall test them." "Oh no." She cleared her throat. "Statement 1. How about that local sports team?" Miles raised an eyebrow. "We don't have sports in common." Elantha crossed out the line. "Statement 2. Nice weather lately. He looked around at the crimson-tinted sky of her homeworld, eternally shrouded in cosmic twilight. Elantha. The last time this planet had weather was 5,000 years ago. She crossed it out. Statement 3. I like your shoes. Miles looked down at his worn boots. They're not great. She crossed it out, frustration building. Your small talk is inefficient. Miles laughed. Honestly, humans mostly wing it. She stared blankly. Wing it? Improvise. She considered this carefully. Then, Miles, I enjoy your presence. I wish to understand you better. Let us converse freely. Miles nearly choked on air. That was perfect. Her glowing eyes widened. Truly? Yeah, that was real. Elantha Chorus, Empress of Dread, looked genuinely pleased. Over the next few days, she sought him out during meals. She asked him questions about human emotions. She accidentally sat closer and closer each time. She occasionally stared at him for long stretches before realizing she was staring. The palace staff noticed immediately. Servants whispered behind pillars. Guards exchanged bets. One maid dropped an entire tray upon witnessing Elantha's smile, a small, awkward one, but unmistakably real. Dravik, the stoic captain, approached Miles confidentially. Human, he said solemnly. Her radiance no longer broods on the whisper balcony. Is that a problem? It is an omen. Of what? Affection. Miles turned red. What? No, we're just talking. She's learning about humans. Her radiance once executed a noble for attempting conversation during a meal, Dravik said flatly. Miles froze. She what? She has not glared at you even once during sustenance. Miles swallowed. That's a good thing, right? Dravik frowned. For the Empire, unknown. For you, possibly excellent. Miles sighed. Thanks, I think. That evening, beneath the glowing courtyard lanterns, Elantha approached him once more. Miles, she said quietly. Yeah? She hesitated, a rare, fragile thing for a woman of ancient power. What do humans consider beautiful? Miles smiled gently. Kindness, he said. Warmth, honesty. Someone who's strong but still cares. Elantha's eyes widened, glowing brighter. I see. She turned away quickly, too quickly, her silver hair whipping through the air as she fled toward the palace. But Miles caught something in her voice, something soft and startlingly vulnerable. She wasn't asking out of curiosity, she was asking for herself. The palace adjusted quickly to Miles Arlen's presence, far quicker than the Empress did. Servants began leaving little, human-friendly items in the hallways. Cushions, softer lights, a bowl of fruit someone labeled safe for humans, as if that weren't the bare minimum standard of hospitality. But the nobles? They adjusted. Poorly. Especially when the rumor spread that their eternal sovereign had been seen walking beside a human, not leading him, not interrogating him, walking with him. That alone sent half the aristocracy into a quiet, dignified panic. So when the court assembled in the ceremonial atrium to witness a strategic demonstration, Miles found himself standing awkwardly against a marble column, watching nobles vie for Elantha's attention like predatory birds circling a sun lamp. One noble stood out. Lord Vielisar Dren, tall, sleek, armored in ceremonial obsidian, and sporting a smirk that screamed, I have practiced this in the mirror. He approached Elantha with a flourish. Your radiance, Vielisar purred, bowing so deeply his crown nearly scraped the floor. Allow me to demonstrate the ancient art of the blade dance, performed only by those of noble blood. Elantha nodded politely, too politely. Miles frowned. She never nodded like that. That was her diplomatic nod. The, I want this over with but must pretend otherwise nod. Vielisar unsheathed his blade and spun into a dazzling routine. Slashes like streaks of lightning, footwork that cracked the stone tiles, and a final flourish that created a shockwave powerful enough to ruffle Miles's hair. The nobles gasped in delight. Alantha blinked once. Acceptable. Velisar beamed, chest puffed. I dedicate this performance to your radiance and your future legacy. Miles felt something twist in his stomach. Jealousy? No, that was ridiculous. He barely knew her. She was an empress. She was... Alantha turned toward Miles. Instantly, her expression softened. Miles, are you well? Velisar's smirk died a dramatic death. Miles cleared his throat. Yeah, fine. Just watching. Alantha stepped toward him. 2, 3 steps, closing the distance without hesitation. Her voice dropped to a soft, concerned register that no one in the atrium had ever heard directed at a living being. You seem unsettled. Miles's heart thumped. It's nothing, really. Velisar watched the interaction with growing horror, then fury. His eye twitched. A nearby noble whispered, "Who is that human?" Another answered, "The smiling, the fearless one." The gossip spread like wildfire. Alantha reached out, hesitated, then gently brushed a bit of stone dust from Miles's shoulder. The atrium froze. A drop of ceremonial ink fell somewhere in the distance. A noble fainted. Miles blinked hard. Thanks. Alantha withdrew her hand quickly, face turning away to hide the faint reddening of her cheeks. You should not stand near Velisar's theatrics. His aim is unreliable. It was a performance. Velisar hissed through clenched teeth. Alantha did not turn, and yet Miles was nearly struck. That was part of the flourish. Miles raised a hand. I think I'm good, really. Velisar inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. Human, what is the purpose of your presence here? What value do you offer to the Eternal Empire? Miles shrugged. I have basic first aid training. Several nobles recoiled dramatically. And you think that... Alantha's tone cut like a blade. He offers sincerity. That single sentence dropped Velisar like a hammer. Miles blinked. That's really kind of you. Alantha's posture stiffened, realizing she'd said it out loud, in public, in front of her entire court. To salvage the moment, she abruptly straightened her cape and turned sharply. We are leaving, she declared. Miles, walk with me. Miles followed, heart hammering. And behind them, the nobles erupted into frantic whispering. They stepped into the courtyard, away from prying eyes. Alantha exhaled softly, an unguarded, weary sound she only seemed to make near him. Miles, she began, voice careful. Did Velisar's display disturb you? Honestly. Miles scratched his neck. It felt like he was trying to impress you. Alantha's glowing eyes flickered with confusion. Impress me? Why would he? Miles held up a small object he'd picked along the way. A tiny blue blossom that had grown through a crack in the courtyard stones. It reminded me of you, he said awkwardly. Strong, beautiful, kind of intimidating at first. He offered it to her. Alantha froze, completely froze. Her lips parted slightly. Her eyes widened. Her entire posture shifted as if gravity had abruptly increased. You offer me a gift, she whispered. Yeah, it's just a flower. It is not just anything, she breathed. No one has ever given me something without expecting power or favor in return. Miles swallowed. I'm not expecting anything. Her voice trembled. Then what should I do? Take it, he said gently, if you want to. Slowly, very slowly, Alantha extended her clawed, elegant hand. She accepted the tiny blossom as if it were a priceless relic. Her voice was almost inaudible. Miles, thank you. For a moment, the galaxy felt very quiet, very soft, very human. The palace had been loud before, ceremonial horns, echoing halls, servants hustling around in panicked formation. But the noise that filled it now was different. Harsher, frenzied. Metallic whispers of distress rippled through every corridor. The nobles had convened, and they were angry. Not at Miles, at her. Word of the flower incident spread like wildfire. Her eternal radiance being gifted something so quaint, so fragile, so alive, and accepting it with visible emotion. That alone had thrown centuries of rigid etiquette into chaos. Add the fact that she had touched Miles's shoulder earlier, and the court was now convinced the universe was ending. Miles tried to stay out of the mess. Really, he did. He spent the morning walking through a quiet garden with glowing trees, trying to give Alantha space. But eventually Dravik stormed up to him, panic etched across his normally stoic features. "Human," he said, gripping Miles by the shoulders, "you must come, immediately." "Why? What happened?" "The High Council demands an audience. They question her radiance's choices." Miles's stomach sank. "Because of me?" "Because of everything," Dravik replied grimly. "But yes, mostly you." Miles swore under his breath. "Where is Alantha?" "In the Grand Hall," Dravik said. "She faces them alone." Miles didn't hesitate another second. The Grand Hall was a cathedral of obsidian and swirling scarlet light, its vaulted ceilings held up by monolithic statues of long-dead vampire monarchs. Nobles gathered in tight semicircles, defensive and sharp as knives. At the center, Alantha Chorus stood tall, composed, gleaming in her ceremonial armor. But her eyes were icy, controlled, walled off. She was the Empress again, not the woman who had blushed over a flower. Miles felt a pit of dread settle in his chest. Lord Velisar Dren stood before her, chin lifted arrogantly. "Your Radiance," he said loudly. "The court seeks to understand why a human, insignificant, untrained, unbeautiful, has been granted proximity no other being has attained in centuries." Murmurs surged through the hall. Alantha's voice cut through them like a blade. "His name," she said coldly, "is Miles Arlen." Velisar sneered. "He is beneath you." Every guard stiffened. Several nobles gasped. Alantha didn't blink. "I will determine what is beneath me," she said. Miles's heart raced. Velisar pressed on. "You have accepted a gift from him. You have walked alone with him. You have smiled in his presence. You risked diluting the strength of the eternal throne." A noblewoman stepped forward. "Empress, the Empire trembles when you appear. Softened." Another added, "If your fearsome presence weakens, rebellion may rise. And all because of one warm-blooded outsider." Velisar snapped, pointing dramatically at Miles. Alantha's eyes flashed dangerously bright. "Enough!" Her voice struck with the force of a celestial storm. Even Velisar flinched. But Miles had heard the tremor behind her power, a hint of frustration, fear, and something else. Loneliness. He stepped forward before he could think better of it. The hall erupted in shock. "Miles," Dravik whispered in horror, "do not." But he already had. 1,000 glowing eyes turned toward him. He swallowed hard. "Sorry if I'm breaking protocol or whatever. But you're all talking about Alantha like she's a walking weapon." "She is a weapon," Velisar said. Miles shook his head. "She's a person." A ripple tore through the court, half outrage, half disbelief. Alantha's lips parted, very slightly. Surprise. Miles took another step. "You treat fear like it's the only way to lead. But fear isn't strength. Fear is isolation. And she's been isolated for so long you've forgotten she has feelings. Balasar sputtered. "You dare—" "Yes," Miles said sharply. "I dare." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Miles turned to Alantha, speaking softly but clearly enough for the hall to hear. "You are caring. You are thoughtful. You're strong, yes. But you're also gentle. Not weak, not frightening, not to me." The chamber seemed to inhale as one. Alantha's eyes widened just a fraction, a gleam of vulnerability breaking through her armor. Vialisar snarled. "Human sentiment is irrelevant. The Empress's power lies in terror. If she loses that, she loses the Empire." Miles faced him fully. "No, she becomes something stronger." Balasar scoffed. "And what could be stronger than fear?" Miles didn't flinch. "Respect." The room trembled. "Loyalty earned," he continued, voice steady. "Not forced, not coerced, given freely." Several younger nobles exchanged uncertain glances. They had never heard such a concept spoken aloud. Miles stepped closer to Alantha's side. Carefully, respectfully, but bravely. "And for what it's worth," he added quietly, "Alantha deserves to be treated like someone who matters, not just something that's feared." The hall held its breath. Balasar opened his mouth to retort. He didn't get the chance. Alantha Chorus took a single step forward. It was enough to silence the entire hall. "Miles Arlen speaks truth." Her voice was quiet but absolute. Gasps echoed like thunder. "For centuries," she continued, "I have ruled with shadow and severity. Not because I chose to, but because tradition demanded it." She turned her gaze slowly across the room, the red glow softening, only a touch, but enough for every noble to feel its shift. "Miles has reminded me," she said, "that power without compassion is brittle, empty, cold." A stunned silence. Balasar trembled with fury. "Your radiance! This is madness." Her voice snapped like lightning. "You will not speak of madness. I make my own choices." She lifted her chin with regal certainty. "Miles Arlen has offered me sincerity, honesty, a perception untainted by fear." Her eyes shifted to Miles, only for a heartbeat. "And I value it." Miles's breath caught. The court exploded in whispers, frantic, terrified, confused, and awestruck. But Alantha ignored them all. She raised a hand. The hall dimmed instantly. Shadows curled around her fingertips. "Hear me," she commanded. "The human Miles Arlen is under my protection. Any slight against him is a slight against me." The nobles froze. Alantha's final words sent chills through even the bravest among them. "And I do not take kindly to threats against what I cherish." Miles's heart stopped. Alantha's eyes flicked to him again, soft, burning, unguarded. Then she turned sharply. "This audience is dismissed." The grand hall emptied in terrified silence. Miles stood alone with her, and the tension between them was no longer subtle, not even remotely. The grand hall emptied with the speed of a stampede. Nobles fled in silk and armor, boots clattering across obsidian floors as if the Empress's declaration carried physical force. Doors slammed shut. Guards scattered. Whispers vanished into the cracks of the palace stones. And suddenly, the towering hall was quiet. Miles stood frozen. Alantha stood motionless. A field of unspoken emotions stretched between them, tense, glowing, heavy enough to bend gravity. Alantha did not turn toward him right away. She stayed facing the polished obsidian doors, her back straight, her cape falling like a dark waterfall behind her. It would have looked regal if not for the tremble at the edge of her breath. Finally, she spoke. "You should not have intervened." Miles blinked. "Seriously? They were verbally attacking you." "You risked everything," she said quietly. "In my court, that is not bravery. That is recklessness." He stepped closer. "Alantha, I wasn't going to stand there while they tore you down just because you... He stopped himself before he said it. Care. She turned slightly, just enough for one glowing red eye to meet his. Because I what? She asked softly. Miles's heart tried to flee through his ribcage. Because you... He swallowed. Because you're trying. Because you're a good person under all the scary titles and armor and the whole cosmic vampire overlord aesthetic. Her eyes widened. Good. Yeah. Me? Miles nodded. You're kind, thoughtful, lonely, and they punish you for every scrap of humanity you show. Alantha didn't breathe for a moment. Not because she didn't need to, but because the words hit too deep. Her voice, when it came, was fragile. Miles, I do not know how to be seen the way you see me. He took a few steps forward, closing most of the distance between them. You already are, he said quietly. You just don't believe it yet. Her expression trembled at the edges, like a fracture threatening to split. You confuse me, she whispered. I have led armies, broken insurgencies, commanded worlds. But you... Her hand lifted slightly, as if drawn to him by instinct, then stopped in midair. You make me feel unsteady. Miles's breath caught. Is that bad? No, she admitted. Terrifying, but not bad. She turned fully toward him now, and up close, her composure didn't hold. Her armor still gleamed, her crown still shadowed the air, but her eyes were wide and uncertain, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff for the very first time. Miles, she murmured, what you said in front of the court, why did you do that? Truly, because I care about you. The words left him before he could tailor or soften them, a confession raw enough to shake the air. Alantha inhaled sharply, an instinctive, involuntary reaction. You care. Not a question, a realization. Miles, she whispered, stepping closer, closing the last few inches between them. You are a fragile, mortal being, and yet you speak to me as though we are equals. We are. Her glowing eyes flickered with something he'd never seen before. Something soft, bright, and terrified in a beautiful way. I do not know how to return such openness, she confessed. My people do not show affection. They conquer, they feed, they dominate. But tenderness? Her voice cracked. That is forbidden. He lifted a hand, slowly, gently, and cupped it near her cheek without touching, giving her space, letting her choose. Alantha, he said softly, you don't have to conquer me. I'm not afraid of you. Her gaze locked onto his, wide and trembling. You should be. I'm not. His fingertips brushed her cheek. She froze. Ancient instincts warred inside her, predator, ruler, monster, empress, crashing against the newfound, fragile thing he awakened in her. Her lips parted, her breath shook. Her hand rose in a trembling motion and rested, hesitant, feather-light, against his wrist. Miles, she whispered, I have never wanted something so gentle. I do not know if I am allowed. Then let me show you, he breathed. Her glowing eyes softened, and then she leaned forward, slowly, haltingly, like she feared the universe might shatter from the act. Their foreheads touched. Her crown tilted forward, nearly knocking him. But she steadied herself with both hands on his arms, surprisingly tender for someone with claws. She whispered, almost inaudible, Tell me, if I am doing this incorrectly. You're perfect, he whispered back. Her breath shuddered, and she kissed him. Not like a conqueror, not like a queen demanding loyalty, not like a creature of myth. Her lips were cool, careful, trembling with emotion she didn't know how to contain. Miles kissed her back with warmth she'd never felt in thousands of years. Her hands clutched his sleeves, drawing him closer, not out of dominance, but out of fear he might slip away. When they finally parted, Elantha stared at him with stunned, glowing eyes. She swallowed hard. I have undone centuries of walls with one moment. Miles brushed a thumb over her cheek. Then maybe they needed to fall. She exhaled shakily. Miles Arlen, she whispered, voice trembling in a way that could bring an empire to its knees. I think I cherish you. His breath caught. He smiled softly. I cherish you too. Elantha's knees almost buckled. She covered her mouth with one hand, overwhelmed. I must sit down before I collapse and humiliate myself. Miles laughed softly and guided her to a nearby marble bench. And the Empress of Dread sat beside him, cheeks glowing, crown tilted, heart racing like a frightened starling. Because a human had kissed her gently. Because someone had finally seen her, not feared her. Seen her. For the next hour, the palace behaved like a pressure cooker of rumors. No one knew precisely what had happened in the Grand Hall, but everyone knew something had broken, and that someone had broken it with her. Elantha Chorus, Empress of Dread. By the time Miles and the newly flustered Empress left the quiet alcove where their kiss had happened, the entire palace had transformed into a state of frantic order. Guards jogged down corridors in stiff lines, servants whispered in terrified excitement, and the nobles pretended not to lurk around corners. Miles barely had time to process any of it before a very familiar voice shouted, "There he is, the human catalyst." Archivist Velerin, the scholar with the enormous monocle, sprinted toward them with several more researchers in tow, each holding thick volumes and ceremonial scrolls. Elantha tensed. "Do not! It has happened!" Velerin squeaked triumphantly. Her radiance accepted affection from a mortal being. Tradition dictates the shadow bond clarification, a vital cultural step. Miles blinked. Shadow? What now? Velerin unfurled a scroll so long it thudded dramatically across the marble floor. Yes, according to Imperial doctrine, when the reigning Empress shows emotional vulnerability with another being, a ceremonial clarification must be held to define whether this connection is... He pointed at a glowing section. A passing weakness. The scroll shimmered. A strategic political alliance. It shimmered again. Or a formative bond with potential dynastic implications. Miles stared. That last part sounds kind of serious. Elantha hissed. It is entirely too serious. We are not performing this ceremony. Velerin gasped. Her radiance, the nobles will assume the worst. Without clarification, they may interpret your tenderness toward the human as a sign of empire-wide destabilization. Miles winced. Sorry? Do not apologize. Elantha snapped, then softened instantly. It is not your fault the court is composed of melodramatic relics. Velerin cleared his throat. The palace has already assembled, Your Radiance. A refusal would spark political chaos. Elantha muttered something ancient and hostile under her breath. Miles touched her arm gently. If it helps you, I'll go. She froze. Miles, she whispered, you just kissed me. I will not drag you into a spectacle you did not agree to. He smiled softly. It's okay. I meant that kiss. I meant every word. And I don't want you facing this alone. Elantha's eyes widened, glowing brighter than before. Her voice cracked ever so faintly. Very well. The ceremonial hall had been prepared in record time, ornate banners unfurled, ancient torches lit, and a raised obsidian platform glowing with swirling crimson patterns. Miles stepped beside Elantha as nobles filled the chamber. Whispers buzzed like insects. He's standing beside her. Is he under a spell? Why is he not incinerated yet? Alantha squeezed his hand once, so quick it could have been an illusion. But Miles felt it. A silent thank you. 3 elder nobles approached, each wrapped in ceremonial robes decorated with skeletal motifs. One carried a chalice. The second held a reflective obsidian mirror. The third held a pillow with a very sharp ceremonial dagger on it. Miles cleared his throat. "Is this dangerous?" Alantha whispered back. "Only if I do something catastrophically emotional." Miles gulped. The eldest noble stepped forward. "Empress Alantha Chorus, human Miles Arlen, you stand before us to clarify the nature of your connection. Speak truthfully." Miles opened his mouth. Alantha cut in first. "There is nothing to clarify," she said coolly. "Miles is under my protection, that is all." Miles felt a small sting of disappointment. Alantha saw it. Her expression faltered. The elder noble nodded gravely. "And you, human Miles Arlen?" Miles swallowed hard. The entire court was watching. "And yet, I care about her," he said clearly. "Not as a ruler, not as a symbol, as a person." A gasp rippled across the hall. Alantha whipped her head toward him, eyes wide, breathing unsteady. "Miles," she whispered, "you do not have to." "I'm not afraid of saying it." The elder noble turned to Alantha. "Your Radiance, the human has spoken. Do you deny or accept?" She stiffened, then slowly, painfully, lowered her walls. Her voice trembled. "I accept." A roar of shock flooded the chamber. The dagger lit up. The chalice glowed. The mirror reflected swirling crimson light that rose into the air like shimmering mist surrounding both of them. Miles froze. "Is this safe?" "Probably," Alantha said. "That is not comforting." The mist encircled them, weaving between their joined hands like living ribbons. A low hum filled the hall, ancient, resonant, powerful. Suddenly the mist flashed once, then dissipated. The elders bowed deeply. "It is clarified," the lead noble declared. "The Empress has chosen a bond of personal meaning." Miles blinked. "So, what does that actually mean?" Alantha's cheeks glowed faintly, her eyes softening. "It means," she said quietly, "that the court now acknowledges you as someone significant, someone I hold dear." Miles's breath caught. "Oh," he whispered. "Is that okay?" Alantha stepped closer, just enough that only he could hear. "It terrifies me," she admitted. Then, voice softer, "I want it anyway." Miles gently took her hand. Alantha didn't pull away. And the court watched, awed, terrified, confused, as their Empress let herself be human for the first time in centuries. For the first time in its long, intimidating history, the Eternal Palace felt warm. Not literally. Its soaring obsidian architecture still radiated the usual chill of a place designed to intimidate entire star systems. But the atmosphere had changed in subtle, unmistakable ways. Servants whispered less fearfully. Guards stood a little less rigid. Torches burned with softer crimson light. Alantha noticed it immediately. "Why is the palace glowing like revelry night?" she murmured as she and Miles walked down a long corridor, their footsteps echoing in tandem. Miles shrugged. "Maybe everyone's just happy." "Nonsense," she said. "My people do not experience happiness, only dread in different flavors." A passing servant dropped her tray, squeaked, and fled, mouse fast. Miles gave Alantha a look. "They're adjusting," she corrected herself. He smiled. "There you go." Alantha's glowing eyes flickered, embarrassed. The shadow bond clarification had unleashed something none of the nobles were prepared for. Permissions. Suddenly, anything less than hostility toward Miles was no longer treasonous. This resulted in a very awkward morning for him. A guard bowed so low his helmet clanged onto the floor. A maid brought him tea and whispered, "For the consort, I mean guest, you are a guest," before fleeing. A scholar followed him for an entire hour, taking notes on human love behaviors before crashing into a statue. And everywhere Miles went, Elantha's eyes followed. Not stalker-level watching, not Empress-level monitoring. Just quiet attention. Subtle, soft, curious. She stood close to him in hallways without fully realizing it. And every time their hands brushed, she stiffened. Not pulling away, but recalibrating her emotional processor like a machine receiving unfamiliar code. Miles found it adorable. "So," he said one afternoon as they walked through a gallery of ancient murals, "about this whole bond thing, what does it mean to you?" Elantha didn't answer immediately. She stopped in front of a mural depicting an empress of old, blood-red eyes blazing as she raised a sword over a kneeling prisoner. "Humph," she muttered. "She looks dramatic." Miles laughed. "Says the woman with a 7-spiked crown." Elantha glared, then sighed. "Fair." He nudged her gently. "You avoided the question." Her shoulders tensed. "It is complicated." Miles waited patiently. Finally, she spoke. "When my people bond, it is usually for dominance, alliance, or lineage. Something transactional, functional, cult." "And ours?" he asked softly. Elantha turned to him, expression vulnerable and unguarded. "Ours is none of those things, and that terrifies me more than any war I have fought." Miles's chest tightened. "You're safe with me. You know that, right?" Her eyes softened. "I am learning it." Miles didn't expect the Empress of Dread to transform overnight, but she was trying, and her attempts were so earnest, so awkward, so heartbreakingly sweet, that he found himself smiling more in these halls than he had in years. One morning, he walked into her study to find her practicing something with rigid determination. "Elantha?" he asked. She froze, caught mid-action. Her arms stiffened in a strange circular gesture around her torso. "What are you doing?" Hug." Miles blinked. "A self-hug?" "I haven't mastered the stance yet," she said defensively. He laughed gently. "Come here." She hesitated, claws fidgeting at her sides. "Miles, what if I crush you?" "You won't." "What if I pierce your fragile organs with my gauntlets?" "That's admittedly possible, but I trust you." Elantha slowly approached, arms half lifted. She stopped just inches away, staring at him with the concentration of someone defusing a bomb. Miles closed the distance himself and wrapped his arms gently around her. She froze. Absolutely froze. Then her hands found his back, slowly, timidly, her fingers trembling. "Is this correct?" she whispered into his shoulder. "It's perfect." She clutched him tighter, just slightly, just enough to show how much she needed it. Later, guards found her in a daze, standing in the corridor, still mimicking the motion. Over the next days, Miles taught Elantha how to make tea. She vaporized the first pot, boiled the second into sentience, then finally made one that didn't hiss. Elantha escorted him to the indoor gardens, watching his reactions to plants, like each smile was a scientific discovery. She began scheduling unofficial palace walks, where they would talk about anything except politics. Mostly human sayings she didn't understand. Raining cats and dogs nearly caused a diplomatic incident. She started finishing his sentences. Not intentionally. She was simply paying attention. Miles discovered she hummed when she was thinking. Elantha discovered he talked to plants when he thought no one was looking. Both found this adorable. One evening, on a balcony overlooking the starlit horizon, Miles found her leaning against the railing, cape fluttering, eyes soft with worry. "Alantha, you okay?" She turned his way slowly. "The nobles are uneasy. They have never seen me act like this." "Like what?" She swallowed. "Tender." Miles stepped beside her, letting their shoulders touch. "And you're allowed to be tender." "I do not know how to be," she whispered. Miles offered his hand. She stared at it, then, timidly, rested her clawed fingers on his palm. "You're doing great," he said softly. Her voice cracked a little. "You make me wish I had learned sooner." He squeezed her hand. Alantha trembled just slightly, leaning into the contact. One night, in a quiet moment she'd never experienced with anyone, Alantha admitted, "I used to look into the mirror and see a monster. Now, I see something different. Because you look at me differently." Miles swallowed hard. "You're not a monster. You never were." Alantha closed her eyes, breathing out a shaky exhale that sounded almost like relief. Their bond wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was soft, daily, growing. A human's simple kindness began reshaping an empire. And Alantha Chorus, Galactic Empress, was slowly learning something far more difficult than ruling: how to let herself be loved. The shift began quietly, not with ceremony, not with another show of power, and not with the nobles rioting in fear. Although they did have a few panic attacks along the way. No. The shift began with the Empress waking up one morning and realizing something profound. She did not want to spend another day pretending she didn't feel what she felt. Miles Arlen started noticing it first. The servants who once bowed so sharply they nearly snapped in half now approached him with cautious but genuine smiles. Guards who used to flinch whenever he walked too close now nodded stiffly. Awkward attempts at friendliness that looked like they physically hurt them to perform. Nobles, meanwhile, adopted a new survival strategy. If the human who melted the Empress's heart walked past, look extremely respectful and avoid saying anything that might get you vaporized. This led to hallways going dead silent whenever Miles entered, as if he carried a portable, everyone shut up field. Dravik, however, seemed relieved. "Her Radiance has not executed a single noble all week," he said proudly one morning. Miles blinked. Was that common? "Daily," Dravik said. Miles nearly spit out his tea. But the biggest change, the one that began reshaping the empire, came from Alantha herself. She started smiling, not often, not widely, but softly, warmly, at him. And in a palace of dread, where even a twitch of the Empress's lip could send ambassadors into cardiac distress, this was equivalent to a tectonic event. One evening, as they walked through the infinite staircase toward the upper gardens, Miles caught a pair of nobles staring at Alantha in pure disbelief. Not horror, not suspicion, wonder. And it hit him. The Empire didn't know what to do with an Empress capable of kindness. They had never seen it in thousands of years. But they weren't rejecting it. They were quietly learning from it. Learning because she was learning. And she was learning because she now had someone she trusted. Alantha led Miles through a small door hidden behind crimson drapery. Inside was a private balcony overlooking a massive nebula swirling across the night sky, bathing them in glowing light. "This is where I come to think," she said softly. "It's beautiful," Miles murmured. She stood beside him, hands resting gently on the parapet. But her shoulders were tense. She was building up to something. "Miles," she said, voice fragile, "I must confess something. Something I have not said aloud in centuries." He turned to her, expression soft. "You can say anything to me." Alantha closed her eyes, steadying herself. "When you first arrived, I saw you as an anomaly, a curiosity, a distraction I could control." Miles smirked. Didn't go according to plan, huh? She shook her head. No, you disrupted everything. My routines, my expectations, my beliefs about myself. Her glowing eyes met his, vulnerable and soft. And I find that I do not wish to return to what I was before. Miles's heartbeat quickened. Elantha. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing his in a hesitant, trembling gesture. I am afraid, she whispered. Of what? Of how deeply I feel, and of what comes next. Bonds like ours are unprecedented, unwritten, uncharted territory for my people. Her voice cracked. I do not know if I can be what you deserve. Miles reached up and cupped her cheek gently. You're already more than I ever hoped to find. Her breath shuddered. Then her forehead leaned into his palm, as if the simple contact grounded her entire world. Miles, she whispered, if you were to stay here, truly stay, what would you want? He smiled, soft and sincere. You. Her knees nearly gave out. The next day, Miles attended a smaller council meeting, this time as a guest, not an intruder. The nobles watched him warily, expecting him to flinch or cower under their scrutiny. He didn't. Elantha sat beside him on the throne, still regal, still formidable, but with a presence that felt different now. Less like a blade, more like a shield. When a petitioning ambassador made a rude comment about warm blood interference, Elantha's eyes flashed dangerously. Miles Arlen is my chosen, she announced calmly. The room froze. Chosen. The imperial term reserved for someone the Empress deemed personally essential. Historically used only for spouses, heirs, or soul-bound warriors. Miles nearly choked. Elantha didn't look at him, though he saw her fingers tightening subtly on the throne armrest. He will remain in the palace, she continued. He will contribute his insights freely, and you will treat him with respect. No one dared breathe. Miles swallowed, stunned. Elantha. She glanced at him. Just one flicker of glowing warmth, and it said everything. That night, she invited him to her private chambers. Not romantically, not seductively, but vulnerably. A gesture of trust, of closeness. A fire crackled softly. Candles glowed in swirling crimson glass. Elantha had replaced her armor with simple dark robes, her hair loose over her shoulders. She looked softer, younger, more real. Miles, she began, hesitating by the window. I do not know what the future holds. My reign may be challenged. My people may not understand this bond. Miles stepped behind her, gently taking her hands. We'll face it together. Her breath hitched. He felt her fingers tighten around his. And, he added softly, you don't have to change who you are. You just have to let yourself be who you already were underneath. Elantha leaned into him, just enough for her head to rest against his temple. I am learning, she whispered, to love softly, to lead gently, to be seen. Miles smiled, kissing her hair. And I'm not going anywhere. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in recorded imperial history, the Empress of Dread fell asleep. Not alone in cold silence, but resting lightly against someone who cherished her, someone who saw her, someone who wasn't afraid. Months later, the palace would tell stories of the shift that saved the empire. How compassion, not fear, stabilized a throne. How a human wound his way into the heart of a vampire empress. How she softened, not into weakness, but into strength suffused with warmth. But tonight, Miles and Elantha stood together on her private balcony, hands intertwined, gazing at the swirling nebula that mirrored the new glow in her eyes. Miles, she murmured, voice filled with quiet awe. My face. Is it still frightening to you? He chuckled softly, bringing her hand to his lips. Elantha Chorus, he whispered. "You are the most gorgeous woman in the galaxy." Her cheeks glimmered with a faint red flush, soft, luminous, and completely unguarded. "Then I will believe you," she whispered. And she leaned into him, peaceful in a way she had never known. A new kind of empire began at that moment. One built on kindness, one built on choice, one built on the simplest, rarest thing in the galaxy: love. If you enjoyed this tale of love and humanity, subscribe for more HFY sci-fi stories every day.